This story won the 1995 Bohena Literary Awards as the best regional short story. It's called Taree, the Girl Who Spoke Like Thunder by Paul McCann. The story highlights racial attitudes to different creeds and cultures, and the moral of the story is injustice. And one day, justice will come to those who wait long enough. In the dry scrub of Yellow Valley, there lived an Aboriginal tribe called the Bugawalla. They had been part of the territory as long as there had been kangaroo and lizards among the dusty tracks. The tribal leader of this region was King Walla Walla, and in his domain there was nothing to fear, or nobody else there to challenge his rule in the territory. Every day life was easy and peaceful around the Yilla. The young men of the tribe hunted for food, while the children learned the old ways. King Walla Walla had a teenage daughter by the name of Taree. Taree was a lonely child and spent most of her time painting inside a cave that her father had given to her. King Walla Walla was so busy with his tribal affairs and running off wild camels that he had never noticed Taree was growing up. As there were no other girls her age in the tribe, Taree often went exploring the dry lands around the Yellow Valley. One of her favourite places was inside a large hollow tree on the track far side of the village. Taree never spoke. She never knew how to. No one had really taught her. The only sounds Taree could make were that of the wild animals in the Yilla. She sang the soft song of the wild and laughed the chorus of the kookaburra. She could hiss like the red-bellied black snake and wisp like the strong southerly winds. She made swishing noises like a lizard's tail and could whistle whiplash sounds of the bush birds. Within all of these sounds, Taree had found her voice. One night around the campfire, King Walla Walla was enjoying some wallaby stew, and Taree normally sat quietly behind her father, and suddenly she began to scream a high-pitched shrill as she jumped up and down angrily. The king was worried about Taree and tried to ask her what was wrong. She never answered as the king fired question after question, but the only response he got was the sound of some animal chatter. It was there and then, for the very first time in his life, King Walla Walla realised Taree couldn't talk, couldn't speak, not a word. One of the tribe quickly realised what the problem was and removed the sharp bone that had got stuck in Taree's mouth. The king was shocked to learn of his daughter's secret. Being unable to speak was only half of it, because now the instant guilt began to hit him. King Walla Walla had never helped Taree with life skills since the death of his partner. He had passed Taree on to different women in the tribe and expected them to educate her and to mother her. The fact was that these women never did the job they should have and left Taree to her wanderings. With his worry now of Taree being unable to speak, he had to seek out help from far beyond the region. After calling a large tribal meeting, a number of points were raised. A group of the people from the tribe had offered to bring Taree into the coastal township of Whoop Whoop, where some help could be found. On the far side of the Black Stump near Whoop Whoop, 3 wise old men called White Smoke, Blue Hill, and Red Dust. These 3 had been teachers in their tribes, and before they had worked with other people with speech problems in the native tribes. The laws of the territory had been passed, and a motion had been seconded and the council had agreed that in the morning a small group was to leave the Yellow Valley with Taree for Whoop Whoop. As they left the village on foot, the head tracker placed markings on a few of the shrubs and the plants along the track. 3 days of tracking had passed when they managed to capture a wild camel and some brumbies. After breaking them in, this made their journey a little faster and much easier. It was a long, hard ride that took them to the hill overlooking the coastline. As a group slowly made their way to Whoop Whoop, the people made fun of them on the way, shouted abuse at them. Then Taree opened her mouth angrily to rebuke them, and she muttered the sounds of dingoes and wild birds. The torment she received in return was humiliating. Only for a mounted policeman who happened to be passing by, the crowd would have lynched her and the other members of the tribe. With the help of the policeman, they made their way to the home of White Smoke. This wise man, who was actually a professor of English grammar and a professional speech therapist in the Whoop Whoop Public Health Board. White Smoke immediately saw the group, and after a brief examination of Taree's vocal cords, decided to take on board the problem himself. He asked the Bugawalla tribesmen to leave Taree with him for 1 year and then to make their return after the wet season. 3 elders were unsure what to do. They spoke amongst themselves for a while before allowing White Smoke to have custody of Taree. They couldn't return to the tribe and to King Wallowa, saying that their mission had failed. So they left Taree with White Smoke and made their way back to Walla Walla. Then and there, something new had started for Taree. A new life. An urge, an encouragement that she could better herself. White Smoke urged the elders of the tribe to trust him and bade them farewell. After some discussion, it was decided that Taree was going to have an education. And the Yellow Valley were unaware of the person that Taree was to become. Back in the Yellow Valley, it was scorched and dry, and the land lay cracked with wrinkles. In the drought, there were dust storms, almost a regular event every day. And it wasn't long before the blowflies left for the coast. And then it was probably decided that a year had passed, as the big wet came. Soon a scattered spread of colourful carpets lay over the Yellow Valley, with wild desert flowers sprouting up everywhere. At the time, King Walla Walla himself left the village on back of a camel to collect his daughter. Now he was assured in his own heart that he would receive not just his daughter, but someone who would keep his name going in the village long after he was gone. Having travelled alone himself, the king was unassured of his journey and the footsteps. He got lost along a track, some of the markings he wasn't sure of. But he kept reassuring himself that all would be okay, and he would find his daughter. There was an inner sense, and he was guided by the Spirit as he made his way through the dusty tracks of the outback. Day after day, King Walla travelled. He could never imagine what lay in store, for just a short distance away from the Yellow Valley, he was set upon by 6 pot-bellied yabos from a distant kettle station. And these yabos had been fueled with alcohol. And they had a definite attitude problem. The 6 cruel men grabbed King Walla Walla and tied him up. They took his camel and drove it off, and then they began to make fun of him, and one of them used a stock whip on his back and tied him to a gum tree. With blood oozing from the open wounds, King Walla Walla started to scream aloud in pain. The 6 mean-hearted men poured cheap wine into his mouth until he was so drunk he couldn't even stand. Then they spat on him and beat him up and left him there. Then they strung a rope around the wattle tree, around his legs, and ever tied it. They put the rope around his neck. As the midday sun belted down, the yabos left him for dead, and rode off on their horsebacks, laughing. The wattle tree was brittle and weak, and the branch snapped with the king's body weight, and he crawled slowly like a dingo to the edge of the creek, where he washed his festered wounds. He rested up for some time before making his way to Whoop Whoop. He walked into the town like a leper, unwanted, unclean, and alone. He was abused and scorned by the people in the town. Some threw stones at him. When the king of the Yellow went into one of the shops and asked for some water and food, the owner called the police and asked that he would be removed. When the police arrived, the shop owner accused the king of stealing. King Walla Walla was arrested and put into a jail awaiting trial. Locked up like a criminal, his noble head began to fall. Further charges of indecent exposure were fabricated, along with assaulting a police officer in the course of his duty. The court hearing was set for Monday morning, and as the jailer turned jingling the keys in the prison, tears started to fall from the eyes of the king of the Yellow. And as the outback sun set far beyond, he thought of the land that he had left and his daughter from the cold cells of Whoop Whoop. On the morning of the court case, the king washed and shaved, now proudly made his way into the packed courtroom and stood there in the dock before the judge. The silence was broken with a thud of the judge's hammer that called for the king's defence team. Not a word was spoken. There was no one there to defend the king. And as the king glanced up, the judge, tears started to roll down his black-skinned face. For there was the sight of his daughter Taree, all dressed up in a black robe with a white wig of curls placed on the top of her head. Taree smiled at her father and spoke for the first time in his presence. "Who and where is the arresting officer in this case?" Taree's voice echoed like thunder all around the courtroom. The king soaked up in the moment like the dry, arid land of the Yellow. As the rains came, he smiled and allowed the elation of the moment to bring a good loud laugh from deep within his heart. A light seemed to shine down on him like that of the outback sun at twilight. The arresting officer stepped forward and spoke to Taree. He uttered some words about the day that this traveller had come into the town. But before he could continue any further, he was set upon by regulations, civil bylaws, and various acts of making false arrests and fabricating information. Taree sent down the police officer for 6 months, and he received fines that totaled hundreds of thousands of dollars. Further charges, including discrimination and deprivation of civil rights, were issued to the shop owner who refused food and water to the dignitary from the bush. The shop owner was fined and made to do 12 months community work in an Aboriginal settlement. With the new instant wealth King Walla Walla bought a new school and built it around the Yellow Valley, and a set of townhouses for each member of the tribe. Life had indeed changed, and Taree herself, and things remained in Whoop Whoop, where she was respected by all who lived there. She eventually one day returned to the Yellow and lived there with her father, happy ever after. The end.